Hey, welcome to part 4 of my message for this week. It's something that I call prosperity and problems. And I think that it's something that is pretty powerful and something that can really speak into your life and something that is pretty applicable. So in parts 1 through 3, we looked at the third part of my sermon series for this week called In the Field, and we're focusing on fig trees and what fig trees can tell us about our walk in lives with Christ. So we broke down a few different passages in the Bible in parts 1 through 3, and in part 4 we're going to stick to the same theme, and we're going to be looking at a passage in Mark 11, and I'm going to share something with you that I call the den of robbers, because that's how Jesus uses to describe this thing. And so I want to go and explain how this can relate to fig trees and how that can teach us about our walk in our life. I hope you stick around. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope that you are enjoying the sermon series so far. I have part 4 coming in next week, and that is about pomegranates and what those have to tell us. And then the final week will be about olive trees and olive branches. I'm very excited for that one as well. So I hope to see you guys back, and I hope you enjoy. Bye. So last I want to look at Mark 11, verses 12 through 25. Now this is a little bit bigger of a section, so I'm going to move a little bit quicker through it. But it's something that's very important, something I want to share with you guys. It says, "The next day, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf," we just talked about how the leaves meant that the harvest, that the fruit was soon to be bore, but Jesus in this section found himself in a time where the fruit should have been born already. The fruit should have been born due to the time and the growth period of the fig tree. And seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. It's not the season. It's not the right time. Then he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard him say it. So it wasn't the season. And a lot of us find ourselves in that position. Now, when God is talking about figs here, or when Jesus is speaking of the figs and in the situation, it's simply just a metaphor. It acts as a metaphor for the people of Judah and what it connects to. And the people of Judah find themselves in a spot where they have leaves, they have signs that they should be bearing fruit, but they find that they aren't bearing fruit. And why? Because it's not the right season. But Jesus says it is the right season to be bearing fruit. Jesus says, "I don't care what time of year you think it should be. I don't care what type of outcome you think should happen, but I'm telling you that you need to bear fruit, that you need to be in a situation where you are bearing fruit. And it doesn't matter that you're not in the right growing season as far as you're concerned." Jesus says if you have leaves, then you will bear fruit. So if you have leaves and you don't bear fruit, then what are you doing? Jesus said, when you have leaves and you find yourself in that leaf process, once you've developed the leaves, then that means the fruit is on its way. And if your fruit isn't there, if you guys remember back to last week in the section of Deuteronomy, I'm pretty sure it's Deuteronomy 23-24, when we were talking about the grapes, it says that when people walk through your vineyard, they can take your fruit and eat the grapes as they walk through. And this is what Jesus is trying to do. He says, you need to have fruit to feed the hungry. And the hungry are all the people in this world who don't have Christ in their lives. And the hungry are the people who are in a situation right now where they feel like there's nothing that can come out of the situation that they're in, that there's nothing good that can come out of the situation that they're in. Maybe they've been in a spot before Or they've been at a church that only has leaves. And God says, I don't want them to be at a church that only has leaves, so you need to be that person to bring them to a church that bears fruit as well. Because it's not about the time of year, right? We see that especially a lot of churches in the winter do a big push at the end of the year for a big campaign and ending the year right. And while that's good, you shouldn't be giving for a season. You should be giving for a lifetime because of what God has done in you and what God has done for you. And that lack of understanding of just giving at Christmas time every year or giving in the winter time every year, while that's good, it's good that you're giving, but you need to not only give then, but you need to be giving throughout the year. You can't limit God. And you might be saying, well, I'm giving, how does that limit God? Because when you give, God will give back. And God will bless those who bless others. And now it might be financially, it might not be financially. Don't get me wrong when I say that not always when you give money back, God's going to give you more money than you gave back. That's not always how it works. I've heard of stories and people who that has happened to before, but the spirit and the heart of giving is that God will bless you more than how you bless him. You can't outgive God. You can't outbless God. And you might think that it's not the right season in your life. But Jesus says, no, you should be bearing fruit at all seasons of your life as long as you have leaves. Because the leaves are a sign that the fruit should be born. We looked at that in part 3. Verse 15 says, on reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple area and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned tables of the money changers and benches of those selling doves, and what would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. As he taught them, he said, "It is not written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations,' but you have made it a den of robbers." The chief priests and teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him, because the whole crowd was amazed at his teachings. When evening came, they went out of the city. So let's look at that for a little bit, this den of robbers. And so many times in so many places today, I think that we've created a den of robbers out of a house of prayer. Something that should be for God's glory is now a den of robbers, and something that is dishonoring God. And I just ask you, if you're in a situation right now, it could be a church. It might be a church, it might not be a church. That's not necessarily what I'm talking about here. In this case, Jesus was talking about the temple and how the temple had become a symbol for a den of robbers and something that's more glorifying man and used for man's good than for God's good. And there are some things in your life right now, whether that be church or not, that you have allowed something to overpower God, and you have turned what should be a house of prayer into a den of robbers. So I want to encourage you to step out of that position. Now I'm going to look here at verses 20 through 25 to wrap this up. And this section in the NIV is called the withered fig tree, because the withering that God spoke and that Jesus spoke over the fig tree back in verse 14. If you can remember back to verse 14, it says, "Then he said to the tree, 'May no one ever eat fruit from you again.' And his disciples heard him say." So verse 20 through 25 is a follow-up to that. Now remember, Jesus is not talking about necessarily a fig tree here, but he's talking about the house of Judah and the land of Judah. So let's see what it says. It says, "In the morning as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots," the same fig tree. Peter remembered and said to Jesus, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered." Verse 22 says, "Have faith in God," Jesus answered. "I tell you the truth, if anyone says to this mountain, 'Go, throw yourself into the sea,' and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will happen, it will be done for them. Therefore, I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And when you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive him, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your sins. So I just want to end this by saying, even though God has withered some things in your life, because remember this house of Judah that he was talking about, this land of Judah, and the fig trees that he used to represent that, they had turned away from God. They had turned away, they had worshipped false idols, the things that they were doing back in the Old Testament. When we looked at Jeremiah 24, is the same things that they're doing now. And even though Jesus was walking on the earth, they still turned away from God, turned away from Jesus, and towards false idols. And Jesus said that they will wither. And they did. Because anybody or any group that worships or praises anything except God, the Creator, will wither. It might be prosperous for a small time, but in the end, they will not be prosperous. They will fall at the hand of God, because God will glorify those who believe in him and who worship him and who praise him and who love him and who thank him. And he will show that more back to you, but he will not stop at tearing down those who worship false idols. God will not stop to tear down those who go against his honor and his love and are a bad representation of his love. And our labels that we put on things today do not necessarily apply. Just because a church says that it's a church doesn't necessarily mean that it's preaching the love and the honor and the glory of God. It does not mean that. That's a label that we have put on it. But God will not allow that to be prosperous in the end, because in the end it will only be the people who are loving and who are living, trying to be just like Jesus, that will be prosperous. And I ask you today, if you've never trusted God, if you've never put your faith in God, then I want to offer this time to you today. If you could bow your head with me, and this is for those who are coming to God for the first time or for the first time in a long time. I just ask that you bow your head and say, God, I know that Jesus has come onto this earth for my benefit, and that he died on the cross bearing the weight of sin, including mine. And I had no control over it. But I know that when Jesus died on that cross, that he bore the weight of our sin and he descended with that into hell. But then 3 days later, he rose from the dead and he ascended into heaven, and that he defeated death. He destroyed death so that we never have to see it, so that I never have to experience it. And God, I ask that you come into my life now, that you take over my life and allow me to live for you. God, allow me to praise you and glorify you through all that I do. In your holy name we pray. Amen. If you just prayed that, then I would love to get in contact with you. My Gmail that I use for this is pastormitchs@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Love to help you take some next steps. Next week we're going to be looking at part 4 in this sermon series. And if you guys remember back to Haggai 2 verse 19, we talked about the grapes, which we looked at last week, the fig trees, which we just looked at today. Next week is pomegranates, and the week after that is olives. And I'm very excited for the last 2 messages that are in here. This has been a sermon series that has been challenging me and pushing me. And it's something I'm really excited to continue to share about. I hope you guys enjoyed it today, and I will see you all next week.